Happy Mother's Day. I'm Clarke Englund, the Sunday school teacher for the adult Bible class at New Braunfels Bible Church. As we are going through the book of Isaiah, last week we looked at Isaiah chapter 33, which was the final woe in this whole section of middle section of Isaiah. And it was against Assyria and all the nations who plundered Israel and Judah. We saw how the Jews had also a change of heart, and in how they were seeking the Lord's help instead of seeking someone else's help. We saw that war was inevitable, and that the Lord would protect Judah during this time of struggle for them. From Isaiah chapter 7 to Isaiah 39, this whole section is Isaiah's hammering home the point about who do you trust, Judah? And from chapter 13 through chapter 35, which is where we're going to cover today, Isaiah is talking about God as the master over the nations. And so why are you trusting anyone but God? He is the only one who can save you. And so this week we're going to look at chapter 34 and 35. And so let me take a look at, let me pull up Isaiah 34 and read Isaiah 34 from the New Living Translation. So it says, a message for the nations. Come here and listen, O nations of the earth. Let the world and everything in it hear my words. For the Lord is enraged against the nations. His fury is against all their armies. He will completely destroy them, dooming them to slaughter. Their dead will be left unburied, and the stench of rotting bodies will fill the land. The mountains will flow with their blood. The heavens above will melt away and disappear like a rolled up scroll. The stars will fall from the sky like withered leaves from a grapevine or shriveled figs from a fig tree. And when my sword has finished its work in the heavens, it will fall upon Edom, the nation I have marked for destruction. The sword of the Lord is drenched with blood and covered with fat, with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of rams prepared for sacrifice. Yes, the Lord will offer a sacrifice in the city of Bozrah. He will make a mighty slaughter in Edom, even as men as strong as wild ox will die, the young men alongside the veterans. The land will be soaked with blood and the soil enriched with fat. For it is the day of the Lord's revenge, the year when Edom will be paid back for all it did to Israel. The streams of Edom will be filled with burning pitch, and the ground will be covered with fire. This judgment in Edom will never end. The smoke of its burning will rise forever. The land will lie deserted from generation to generation. No one will live there anymore. It will be haunted by the desert owl and the screech owl, the great owl and the raven. For God will measure that land carefully. He will measure it for chaos and destruction. It will be called the land of nothing, and all its nobles will soon be gone. Thorns will overrun its palaces. Nettles and thistles will grow in its forts. The ruins will become a haunt for jackals and a home for owls. Desert animals will mingle there with hyenas, their howls filling the night. Wild goats will bleat at one another among the ruins, and night creatures will come there to rest. There the owl will make her nest and lay her eggs. She will hatch her young and cover them with her wings, and the buzzards will come, each one with its mate. Search the book of the Lord and see what he will do. Not one of these birds and animals will be missing, and none will lack a mate. For the Lord has promised this. His spirit will make it all come true. He has surveyed and divided the land and deeded it over to those creatures. They will possess it forever from generation to generation. So we get to the first section in Isaiah 34. Who is the Lord angry with? So we see that he's angry with the nations, especially it says with the armies of the nations. And he starts to deal with them. And he deals with them by completely destroying them. He dooms them to slaughter is the way he puts it. You see that the dead are unburied and that there's a stench flowing up from all the dead bodies. The mountains are flowing with blood. The heavens melt away. They're rolled up. Even the stars have been rolled as a scroll. And it says they fall from the sky. These words of doom and destruction that are described here, they're the same the same words that are used in Joshua chapter 6, verse 17, where the Lord is telling Joshua to go against and destroy the Canaanites. And it's also the same word used in 1 Samuel 15, verse 3, where he's talking about dealing with the Amalekites. This language and description, fits the battle of nations at the end of the tribulation between Christ and all the kings of the nations and the beast and the false prophet. And so you see that in Revelation 19, verses 17 to 21. And that's the same kind of destruction that you see where the battlefield is full of dead bodies. They go unburied, and the stench goes forward. So why, though, does he use Edom as the example of destruction for all the nations? He has picked out Edom, and he has a special destruction for them. So Edom is being described as the destruction that's going to happen to them, but it's also an example of the destruction for the nations, because Edom has been pitted against Israel from the get-go. The Edomites are descendants of Esau. So Esau versus Jacob. They refused passage to Israel when Israel came out of Egypt. Israel asked the king of Edom, "Can we have passage, brother?" They understood the family relationship. "Brother, can we have safe passage through your country? We will stay on the highway. We will turn neither to the left, to the right. We will, if we ask for any water, we will pay for water or whatever we take." And the king says, "No, absolutely not." And he threatened violence. He had his army come out against them and block the path. And so Israel had to go around the whole land of Edom. And you can find that story in Numbers chapter 20. They just didn't like each other. And so if you know where Petra is, if you remember Indiana Jones and the Lost City, Petra, that was one of their major cities. And you can see the desert land that was the land of Edom. And other Edomites that you would remember would be Herod the Great and the Herods of the time of Jesus. And so obviously they put Jesus to death. And so that, really this prophecy of destruction against Edom is for all the sins they've committed through history. And some of those hadn't even happened yet at the time of Isaiah's writing. And he terms this destruction of Edom in terms of a sacrifice. He talks about the sword covered with blood of sheep and goats and rams and the fat. And we know from, as in the New Testament, from Romans chapter 6, the wages of sin is death. Well, in the Old Testament, the wage of sin was a sacrificial lamb going to the altar. And that paid the price of sin. The New Testament, we either pay ourselves for eternity, or we allow Jesus Christ to pay that price for us. And so believers, we accept Jesus Christ's payment. But here he's describing this in terms of Edom and saying, you're going to pay the price for your sins. You alone, you kings, you warriors, you people of Edom, you are going to pay the price for your sins. And it doesn't matter whether it's the young or the old. It says the young or the veterans, the weak or the strong, all will pay the price for their sin. And he moves on from that sacrifice piece there in verses 5 through 8 to the rest of the chapter really describes what Edom looks like after the destruction. And it is a place of desolation. It reminds you of the description of Sodom and Gomorrah after hellfire and brimstone rained down on those. It talks about the tar pits and the desert and totally inhabitable. by man, and there's nothing of beauty left. And just the owls and the wild critters, and if you will, the wild unclean animals are the ones that take over the land. And we see in other places, Isaiah has talked about the land being turned over to animals and not being habitable. And we see that yet again here in this part. And I say, so how sure was this prophecy? And Isaiah tells us in verse 16 and 17, that this is a sure prophecy. It's written in the book of the Lord. He has directed it. He's written it down. And it says he is ensured that his spirit would direct it and make sure that it comes to pass. His anger and judgment against Edom is a sure thing. It is going to come to pass, and Edom will pay the price for their sins. And like all the other things, you don't really see the word trust in this chapter. So why is this about trust? Why is it included in this section? And really, it comes down to the Creator dealing with his creation. God dealing with the kings and the armies of the nations who have stood up and become godless and said, God, we don't need you. And Edom was a prime example of that. So this section is Isaiah saying, look, one more time, God, the Creator, is greater than all the creation. He directs man and he directs all the creation. So why would you trust anyone but God himself? And you can see how incapable the nations are against protecting you and being fit for the trust. So let's go on now and read chapter 35. So Isaiah 35 says, hope for restoration. Even the wilderness and desert will be glad in those days. The wasteland will rejoice and blossom with spring crocuses. Yes, there will be an abundance of flowers and singing and joy. The deserts will become as green as the mountains of Lebanon, as lovely as Mount Carmel or the plain of Sharon. There the Lord will display his glory, the splendor of our God. With this news, strengthen those who have tired hands and encourage those who have weak knees. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong and do not fear, for your God is coming to destroy your enemies. He is coming to save you. And when he comes, he will open the eyes of the blind and unplug the ears of the deaf. The lame will leap like a deer, and those who cannot speak will sing for joy. Springs will gush forth in the wilderness, and streams will water the wasteland. The parched ground will become a pool, and springs of water will satisfy the thirsty land. Marsh grass and weeds and rushes will flourish where desert jackals once lived. And a great road will go through that once deserted land. It will be named the Highway of Holiness. Evil-minded people will never travel on it. It will only be for those who walk in God's ways. Fools will never walk there. Lions will not lurk along its course, nor any other ferocious beasts. There will be no other dangers. Only the redeemed will walk on it. Those who have been ransomed by the Lord will return. They will enter Jerusalem singing, crowned with everlasting joy. Sorrow and mourning will disappear, and they will all be filled with joy and gladness. So let me share the screen again. As we go to Isaiah 35, the first, really the whole chapter, it says, compare what's happening in chapter 35 and 34. And you see the comparison of 35 is you have restoration. In chapter 34, you have judgment. You have growth and beauty compared to the death and desert that you find in chapter 34. And you see the glory of God compared to the justice and judgment of God. And so we then go, when is this? And how do we know that? And Isaiah is constantly talking to the future and to the millennial kingdom and to the times past the tribulation when the Messiah is here and he is ruling and reigning in Jerusalem and over Israel. And so this is yet again a description of that time. Verses 5 to 7 you can really, it talks about the deaf hearing and the blind seeing, the lame walking. And when you look at Matthew 11, verses 1 to 6, that John the Baptist is in prison. And he sends his disciples to Jesus and said, "Are you the one? Are you the Messiah?" And Jesus didn't say yes or no. He told the disciples to go back and tell John. Tell him what you see. Tell him what you see happening and what you hear. You see the deaf hear again. You see the blind and their sight restored. You see the lame make to walk. You see the poor brought into the temple rejoicing and worshiping. You hear the gospel preached. You see the dead raised to life. And those are all signs of the Messiah. And Jesus just quoted Isaiah instead of saying, "Yes, I'm the Messiah." He turned John the Baptist back to the book of Isaiah and exactly how John would understand. You can also spiritualize this a bit. If you look at Isaiah 6, we talked previously about how spiritually deaf and blind Israel had become and how the nations were. And so you can see that same kind of thing here. Not a fan of spiritualizing it because I don't think it's necessary, but certainly in the kingdom age when the Messiah is here, it won't be a spiritual thing. The deaf will actually be able to hear. This will be a physical thing. But it will also be spiritual from the sense that everyone will know that he is God and they will be there to worship him. And then we see the highway in the last three verses 8 to 10. In chapter 34, there is no passageway. Edom would never let Israel go through it. But in Edom, in the last section of chapter 34, it's a desert. There's no habitation. There is no roads. It is just a place of destruction. And so here he's talking about there's going to be a highway built. And literally the term highway is an elevated road. And so it will be the path for all those who are godly, who are going to God, who love him and seek him. This is the path. And it will be, again, you can spiritualize this because it says those that are redeemed. And that's the idea of the kinsman redeemer that we saw so beautifully in the book of Ruth. It says sorrow and mourning are going away and only joy and gladness will be there. But this is the same picture. So you can spiritualize it again, but it's also the same picture you get in Revelation 21 as the New Jerusalem is descended and the nations come to the New Jerusalem and they walk on this highway, and only the redeemed, only the godly are allowed into New Jerusalem. And so the nations and the kings come and they bring their offerings, and there is no sorrow, there is no mourning. It is only joy and gladness as they go in and they worship the King, the Messiah. And literally, he's talking about this highway being as a removal of all barriers to come to the King, to come to the Messiah. And for us today, all the barriers are removed for us to come to Jesus Christ. And so what is the point of these two chapters? They're really this last two chapters in this section of God is the master of the nations. And again, his whole point is, why would you trust the nations? Why would you trust anyone but God? And this is, you get the mirror image of God's justice and God's glory. And God provides, he promises and he provides in both chapters to protect Israel. And so trusting God brings restoration and refreshment. Trusting the Creator makes sense in these things. And God reveals himself to us when we seek him, when we trust him. He removes those barriers. And that is just as applicable to us as it was to Israel and Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem in the days that Isaiah is writing to them. So remember, trust the Creator. Do not trust the creation. So I hope you're enjoying this series on Isaiah. Join us next week, Sunday morning, if you want to join us live, or you can continue to join us on these recordings after the fact. Have a great week.